In over 150 years of baseball, only two men have done something that seemed impossible: dominate from the mound and dominate from the plate. Shohei Ohtani, Babe Ruth, separated by a century. A talent the sport thought was extinct. But the most surprising thing isn't what they did on the field. It's what happened when they changed teams, and the entire history of baseball changed with them. But before the home runs, before the fame, there was the beginning. Before Babe Ruth became a legend, he was just a boy in the streets of Baltimore. At the turn of the century, Baltimore was a rough, working-class city. Factories, crowded ports, and families fighting to survive. His parents owned a small tavern, working day and night, leaving young George to wander the docks, the alleys, and the smoky streets almost entirely on his own. By the age of 7, he was skipping school, stealing bites of food, and getting into fights, a kid no one could control. And here's the part most people don't know. Ruth later said he never really had a childhood. Only the city and trouble as constant company. So his parents made a drastic choice. They sent him to St. Mary's Industrial School, part orphanage, part reform school, part correctional home. A place meant to straighten out boys the city had given up on. But for young George Ruth, it became something else entirely. Here, under the guidance of Brother Matthias, a giant of a man with a gentle voice, the boy found discipline, structure, and for the first time in his life, purpose. And this is where the story takes a turn. Most people never hear. Ruth said that Brother Matthias didn't just teach him baseball. He saved my life. At St. Mary's, Ruth swung a bat every single day. He pitched until his arm ached, and he hit balls so hard they shattered windows, rolling into the far fields outside the school walls. What began as a distraction slowly became an obsession. And through that obsession, the troubled kid from Baltimore began to disappear. In his place, a force of nature was being born. By the time he was a teenager, the brothers at St. Mary's whispered the same thing. This boy isn't normal. A century after Ruth's rise, on the opposite side of the world, another boy was quietly beginning his own impossible journey. Shohei Ohtani was born in the small city of Oshu, a place of mountains, rice fields, and long winters that shaped a quiet kind of toughness. His father worked long shifts in a factory. His mother, once a national-level athlete, taught him discipline by example. From the time he was a child, Shohei wasn't chasing toys. He was chasing habits, routine, focus. And here's something most fans never hear. As a young boy, he kept a growth diary, tracking his height, his diet, his goals, even imagining the speed he wanted to throw when he grew up. He was 10 years old. Shohei's father, Toru, wasn't a famous player, but to Shohei, he was everything. Every night after work, Toru Ohtani took his son to an empty field. Snow, rain, wind, it didn't matter. There, father and son worked on mechanics, footwork, balance, and discipline. But his father never pushed with anger. Only structure, only intention. He taught Shohei a rule that shaped his entire life. Your talent is a gift. Your discipline is a choice. And that choice, Shohei made every single day. As Shohei grew, coaches noticed something unusual. He loved pitching and hitting with the same intensity. Most kids eventually choose one. Shohei never did. He believed he could be great at both, even when everyone said it couldn't be done. Some say he admired Babe Ruth early on. Others believe the challenge simply lived inside him. Maybe both are true, but one thing is certain. By the time he reached high school, he wasn't just talented, he was breaking charts, breaking expectations, breaking rules the sport thought were unbreakable. Coaches in Japan whispered the same words that once echoed in Baltimore. "This boy isn't normal." And while the world was witnessing a new kind of greatness in Japan, baseball had already seen something like it once before. A century earlier, another young prodigy was rewriting the limits of the sport before the world called him the Babe. George Herman Ruth was one of the most dominant pitchers in baseball. In 1916, he posted a 1.75 ERA, one of the best in the American League. He threw more than 230 innings per season, complete games, shutouts, and a fastball hitters said felt unfair. But Boston faced a problem. Ruth wasn't just their best pitcher. He was becoming their best hitter. Teams in that era didn't allow a player to do both. Too risky, too unusual, too impossible. So they protected his arm, kept him on the mound, and limited his at-bats. And here's what makes it even more dramatic. With Ruth as a pitcher, Boston won 3 World Series, 1915, 1916, and 1918. He was carrying the franchise, and they didn't even know it. It was a decision that changed baseball history. Because when Ruth finally got the chance to hit every day, he didn't just succeed, he exploded. 714 home runs, record-shattering power. Seasons with numbers no one thought were real. He transformed baseball from a game of bunts and strategy into a sport defined by power. Then came the moment that shook the league. The trade from the Red Sox to the New York Yankees. Boston lost one of the greatest talents the sport had ever seen. New York gained the foundation of a dynasty. Before Ruth arrived, the Yankees had never won a World Series. After Ruth, they won 4 championships in 14 years and became the most dominant franchise in the history of American sports. One man, one bat, rewrote the fate of 2 cities and changed baseball forever. And as baseball entered the modern era, and a century after Ruth reshaped the game, the sport found something it wasn't prepared for. A teenager in Japan redefining what was possible. Before MLB, Ohtani was already a phenomenon. At just 18, he debuted in Japan, a teenager facing grown professionals without a hint of fear. He threw triple-digit fastballs and hit moonshot home runs that stunned entire stadiums. And here's the part most people don't know. His team built a special development program just for him, because no system had ever seen a two-way talent like this. In 2018, he crossed the Pacific and signed with the Los Angeles Angels on a $20 million deal. And from day one, the experiment became a revolution. In his first MLB season, Ohtani hit towering home runs, threw triple-digit fastballs, and became the first player in history to win Rookie of the Year as both a pitcher and a hitter. Most rookies make a debut. Ohtani made a statement. Then came 2021, a season that didn't just break projections, it shattered them. 46 home runs, exit velocities near the top of the sport, and a blend of power and speed baseball had almost never seen in one player. He wasn't just hitting home runs, he was expanding the limits of what a modern hitter could be. And every projection model failed trying to contain him. And on the mound, he was just as extraordinary. More than 10 strikeouts per 9 innings, a fastball flirting with triple digits, and a splitter so sharp hitters called it unfair. He wasn't pitching like a curiosity. He was pitching like a true ace, one of the most dominant arms in the game. And suddenly, baseball had a two-way superstar. And then, baseball witnessed something rare. By 2025, Ohtani had already won 4 MVP awards, including 2 unanimous ones, a level of dominance the modern game had never witnessed. And that winter, before it all, he made history. A 10-year, $700 million contract with the Los Angeles Dodgers, the largest deal in the history of sports. A contract so massive, most of its money is deferred far into the future. A bet the Dodgers placed on a once-in-a-century talent. The payoff was immediate. In 2024, he won his first World Series ring, and in 2025, his second, 2 World Series in just 2 seasons with Los Angeles Dodgers. And now, he's on track for another historic run. Ruth transformed the past. Ohtani is redefining the future. Ohtani wasn't just rewriting statistics. He was rewriting expectations. And that's where the parallel becomes impossible to ignore. Because baseball had seen this story before. Here lies the most powerful parallel of all. A story written twice. Both men arrived in professional baseball as teenagers. Babe Ruth debuted with Boston at just 19 years old. Shohei Ohtani debuted in Japan at 18. 2 prodigies, a century apart, stepping onto a professional field before they were old enough to understand how rare they truly were. And then comes the turning point. The moment where their paths begin to mirror each other with almost impossible precision. And before the change, Babe Ruth wasn't just promising in Boston. He was already doing the impossible, dominating on the mound and dominating at the plate. A true two-way force, before the world was ready to understand it. Babe Ruth was already great in Boston, but he became a legend when he arrived in New York. Before Ruth, the Yankees had never won a World Series. With him, everything changed. A dynasty was born. 100 years later, the pattern returned. Shohei Ohtani was already a unicorn in Anaheim. But when he joined the Dodgers, something shifted. A new city, a bigger stage, a championship stage. They didn't just dominate, they entered a club that almost doesn't exist. Only 2 men in the history of baseball have done this. 30-plus home runs and 10-plus wins in the same season. Babe Ruth did it first. A century later, Shohei Ohtani did it again. Power and precision, inside the same body, and it goes even deeper. They are the only players in history to combine 100 home runs with more than 500 innings pitched. No position, no role, no system was designed to handle that. They weren't just breaking records. They were breaking the idea of limits. And here's what most people never talk about. Boston was afraid. They believed that if Ruth kept pitching and hitting, he would break, that his arm would fail, that his body would collapse. A century later, teams said the same thing about Ohtani. Too much stress, too much risk, too much ability for one player. Ruth never faced 100-mile-per-hour fastballs. Ohtani does, and he hits them, and he throws them. Different eras, same fear. The sport has always been afraid of players like this because they expose the limits of the system. Ruth hit and pitched at levels the game had never seen. Ohtani did the same a century later. Both delivered seasons where they hit like sluggers and won like aces. Both were described with the same words. This boy isn't normal. Both carried the expectations of an entire nation. Ruth, the face of American baseball. Ohtani, the symbol of Japanese baseball to the world. Not just players, symbols. From that moment on, it stopped being about statistics. It stopped being about eras. It became something deeper, a story about destiny, about timing, about two men who appeared exactly when the sport needed them most. And that's why this story had to be told. This is not a competition. This is not a debate. It's a conversation between 2 centuries, and the only 2 men who challenged the rules of the game. Ruth created the myth. Ohtani is awakening it. And maybe, 100 years from now, a third name will appear. But for now, only these 2 exist. And now that you know this story, you may never see baseball the same way again. Because these are not just sports stories. They are stories of culture, of rivalry, of legacy, and of decisions that changed the world, far beyond the field of play. Stories of characters who redefined what we believed was possible. If this video surprised you, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves great stories. Like 2 brothers who divided the world into 2 brands and never spoke again. That is a story for another episode. This is Untold Sport Stories.